What is the situation on Fuming Lingcha's side? Dusong Mangpoj asked as he put down the teacup. Replying to Milord, our people disguised as who merchants have been keeping an eye on the Qixi Protectorate headquarters this entire time, the kneeling messenger said. In addition, we also requested the aid of the Arabs in keeping watch. We just received word that Fuming Lingcha has already left the Protectorate headquarters and is currently heading toward the front lines on the plateau. And what of Gao Xianji? Dusong Mangpoj said. Along the northern edge of the plateau, the Yusang Empire only cared about two people, Fuming Lingcha and Gao Xianji. These two imperial great generals were not that far from each other, and they could reinforce each other if the situation called for it. Gao Xianji is currently vigorously training his soldiers in preparation for battle. Based on the reports from our spies in Anxi, he's likely planning to attack the kingdoms west of the Zong Mountains, so he should have no time to worry about Qixi. In addition, the relationship between Gao Xianji and Fuming Lingcha has never been good. It has always been Qixi going to the aid of Anxi, and Anxi will rarely go to the aid of Qixi. The chance of this happening is extremely low. The scout gave his honest assessment. Then let's move out. There's no need to worry about General Dian. I will help him keep an eye on Fuming Lingcha. Without the threat of Fuming Lingcha, General Dian shouldn't encounter any problems. Dusong Mangpoj gave a faint smile as he pushed aside his teacup and rose, walking out of the black tent. His army rumbled, kicking up its own cloud of dust as it set off for the northern lines. Hurry! Pour the solder. It's in the wrong position. Move the second module to the left a little. Keep going. The second level is nearly complete. Hurry and get the beehives ready. In the northeast corner of the Tibetan Plateau at the Triangular Gap, the 8,000 to 9,000 craftsmen were working like bees. In the course of several hours, a small-scale city of steel had emerged, glimmering with a silvery light as it took shape. This was a mini-fortress much smaller than Wuxiang's city of steel, around 1/20th the size. Although it was small as a military fort, it was enough to hold around 50,000 soldiers, more than enough for Wang Chong's purposes. Wang Chong had arrived at this number after careful thought. Moreover, this fortress was constructed on that triangular gap on the northeast corner of the Tibetan Plateau, preventing the Tibetans from using it to enter and exit the plateau. However, the Great Tang was capable of using the triangular gap to enter the fort so that it could be defended against Yusang. If all went as expected, this would be the first fortress between the Great Tang and Yusang. Wang Chong's modular construction method once more displayed its might. In some few hours, a fortress was beginning to slowly rise from the plateau out of nothing. Although the construction was still not complete, 2 levels had been finished. With each floor being 3 meters tall, the total of 6 meters was already enough to grant it some basic defensive capabilities. The 3rd level was still being worked on and was well on its way to completion. Once the 3rd level was completed, the fortress would be 9 meters high, and the miniature city of steel would have put its first roots down into the plateau, endowed with significant defensive capabilities. Cree! While the craftsmen were busy, a shrill cry suddenly came from the distance. Wang Chong, standing on the wall, followed the sound and saw that several birds of prey were currently flying in his direction. It wasn't just vultures this time. There were also many rock eagles, gerfalcons, large hawks, sparrowhawks. There were 50 to 60, forming a massive flock. "Milord!" Xianxia was standing to the side, that rock eagle of his perched on his shoulder. His entire body was taut as he stared at the massive flock of birds, and he twisted his head to look at Wang Chong. The birds that had appeared this time were far too numerous. The eagle team alone would be very hard-pressed to deal with them. Haha! There's no need to worry about them. Just let them come. Wang Chong smiled and waved his hand. In addition, Li Sai, get ready. Our guest of honor has arrived. Yes, this general will go. Li Sai clasped his fist in his hand and then descended from the wall, his armor clattering. All soldiers, hear my order. Quickly gather and prepare to meet the enemy. Li Sai's voice rang out like a bell over the plateau. Li Sai took the lead, riding his Fergana steed to the front of the army. Behind him, the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry swiftly formed up. In the rear, the 8,000-some craftsmen seemed to sense that something was amiss, and they became slightly anxious. Only Wang Chong remained calm. Dian Mangban, it's about time you showed up. Wang Chong clasped his hands behind him and smiled. Scouts would precede the army, and for a Tibetan army to send 10-some scouting birds ahead of it was already quite impressive. For there to be 50 to 60 birds this time meant that behind them, an army of unprecedented size was making its way here. Wang Chong's judgment was on the mark. A few moments later, following closely behind the birds of prey, a fierce turbulence surged out of the horizon. This turbulence carried vast quantities of grass and dust that shrouded the entire battlefield. Although this was the only thing on the horizon, everyone instantly felt an air of tension, an invisible pressure surging toward them in a wave. Ni. Soon after, they could hear the cries of warhorses as a light whisper that quickly became as loud as thunder. Bong! Bong! As the drums banged, a massive black banner was thrust out of the horizon, visible even before the warhorses had appeared. This banner was the height of 6 or 7 people, with a red border and black background. Depicted upon it was a blazing white flame, like a devilish flower of the underworld, exuding the thick stench of death. And beneath this massive banner, everyone could see a tyrannical figure, bursting with a desire to kill and slaughter, that viewed the entire world with disdain. This person was riding a divine steed taller than a man, its body as white as snow but its hooves as red as blood. Just a glance from this man and horse caused a chill in the deepest depths of everyone's hearts. Dian Mangban. As Wang Chong looked into the distance, this name emerged in his mind. There was only one person in Wang Chong's memories who could exude such a formidable pressure from such a long distance, and that was Dian Mangban. That snow-white steed with bloody hooves from the Great Snow Mountain was the firmest proof of his identity. Rumble. As these thoughts flitted through Wang Chong's mind, a massive boom of thousands of galloping horses rose from the horizon. Tibetan warhorses surged out from Dian Mangban's left and right, a massive wave sweeping over the world. Ready! Li Sai's voice came from the front of the army, his mountainous figure like a rock in the middle of a surging river, exuding an aura of peerless might. Clang! He raised his signature enormous sword, shining with a cold light in the gloomy sky, and the atmosphere in this northeast corner of the Tibetan plateau instantly turned somber. Rumble! The warhorses continued to get closer, and the atmosphere became as taut as a drawn bowstring. Far from Wang Chong, in another area, Heba Yi became nervous. "My lord, it's Dian Mangban. The Tibetans really did show up. On the night of Pulanhe's death, he had been in the camp and exchanged blows with that mad devil of a Tibetan brigadier general. The experience had left such a deep impression that it haunted his nightmares to this day. He had recognized Dian Mangban at a glance. No, it's not just Dian Mangban. There's also Dusong Mangpoj." An indifferent voice came from the side. Fuming Lingcha was riding on a black steed, a profound look in his eyes as he looked into the distance. Great generals were extremely sensitive to powerful existences of the same level. Although there appeared to be nothing before him, Fuming Lingcha could already sense the presence of Dusong Mangpoj. Although he was surrounded by a mighty force of soldiers, he was as obvious as a beacon in the darkness to Fuming Lingcha. Ah! Heba Yi paled, unable to suppress this yelp as he looked at Fuming Lingcha. Dian Mangban was difficult enough to deal with, but with Dusong Mangpoj here as well, this meant that almost all of the Yusang Empire's forces along the northern border had been mobilized. "Milord, do we need to mobilize as well?" Heba Yi asked. "That bastard. It seems he already predicted this." Fuming Lingcha clenched his fists and shot a glare to his left in the direction of the triangular gap, his eyes spitting flame. He was almost sure right now that this was all within that Wang clan brat's calculations. According to the laws of the imperial court, if Wang Chong moved out on his own to the plateau and encountered an army like Buluhu's, even if he died, his death would be in vain. Fuming Lingcha would be able to avoid any blame and perhaps even deride the Wang clan a little. But now Wang Chong was occupying the triangular gap, very close to the camp of the Chishi Protectorate Army. If both an imperial great general and a brigadier general of Yusang showed up and the Qixi Protectorate army still showed no reaction, then it was truly incompetent. Whether or not Wang Chong died, Fuming Lingcha would still have to explain himself to the imperial court. In a normal situation, Fuming Lingcha wouldn't have cared, but it wasn't too long ago that Dian Mangban and his White Braves had broken through the defensive lines of the Qixi Protectorate army and attacked Wang Chong's City of Steel. In the end, they had also made a large swing and attacked a camp of the Qixi Protectorate army, killing 5,000 Qixi soldiers and General Pulin He. The two incidents added together would become more than a simple problem of proper conduct. The imperial court would begin to wonder if Fuming Lingcha was incompetent, and if the Wang clan and King Song exploited this issue, his position as Qixi Protector General would be at risk. When that time came, not even he would be able to say anything to defend himself. And besides that, the person who had come just had to be the one who had killed his subordinates, Dian Mangban. Although Heba Yi and the others had not said anything, Fuming Lingcha could sense that everyone was expecting him to move out and avenge Pulin He and the other soldiers of Qixi. If he did nothing, he would lose the faith of his soldiers, with the worst-case scenario being rebellion and desertion. Pass on my order. Mobilize the army and have them march here as quickly as possible. But entering the battle without my authorization is out of the question, as are any other actions. Violators will be executed. Fuming Lingcha said. Yes. Elated, Heba Yi took off. On the side, Fuming Lingcha mentally sneered, and as he turned to glance in Wang Chong's direction, his eyes shone with a cold light. He didn't care what that brat had calculated, but if he really thought that Fuming Lingcha would help him, then he was gravely mistaken. Dian Mangban had to be killed, and the Qixi Protectorate army could not just sit on the sidelines and watch. However, he would only enter the battle once Wang Chong and his 5,000 cavalry had been wiped out. At the very least, he would not strike until Wang Chong was killed in battle. If Wang Chong thought that by occupying this triangular gap and luring over a Tibetan great general and brigadier general, he could borrow Fuming Lingcha's strength, then he was far too naive. He would strike, but definitely not in the way that brat imagined. Milord, Fuming Lingcha really did show up. Meanwhile, in the rear of the vast Tibetan army, several figures exuding storms of energy were also looking in Fuming Lingcha's direction. This region was covered in the scouting birds of Yusang. Gerfalcons, rock eagles, vultures. It was simply impossible to hide anything from their eyes. Continue to watch him. As long as Fuming Lingcha doesn't hastily interfere, it's enough. Dusong Mangpoj stroked his mustache, his expression indifferent and confident, as if he had planned for everything. In addition, keep an eye on the movements of the Qixi Protectorate army. Tell General Dian Mangban that I will deal with Fuming Lingcha. Yes, my lord. The messengers quickly set off with their orders. Putting aside Fuming Lingcha and Dusong Mangpoj for the moment, in the front, Dian Mangban was leading an army of tens of thousands, including his 5,000 white braves, toward the triangular gap in the northeast. With Dusong Mangpoj behind him, Dian Mangban had no need to worry about Fuming Lingcha. The only person in his eyes was Wang Chong. Bastard! Damn thing! Dian Mangban clenched his teeth, killing intent washing over his heart. This immature Great Tang youth had used the corpses of 20,000 recruits, 7,000 Qinghai soldiers, and General Dian Pugiel to avenge his killing of Qixi General Pulin He and his 5,000 soldiers. After that, he had advanced onto the plateau, building a fortress and brashly eliminating the forces stationed on the edge of the plateau. The speed of his operations and frequency were simply absurd. Dian Mangban had always viewed himself as extremely proactive, his leadership as sufficiently crazy, but he had never imagined that there was someone even crazier. Once I shatter your army, I'll definitely tear your corpse to shreds to vent my fury. Dian Mangban's forehead creased as madness surged through his mind. Dian Mangban was well aware that this naked challenge of Wang Chong's was intended for him. Halt! At a distance of around 2,000 zhang, Dian Mangban raised his right palm and gave the order for the army to stop. The vast army suddenly came to a stop, forming a straight line. Zurin, Luosang, Deji, follow me. Dian Mangban waved his hand, and several white brave officers along with 10 some white brave elites kicked up dust and rode toward the triangular gap, toward those steel walls shining like silver scales. Behind these walls, that massive steel fortress loomed, still under construction. Upon seeing this, Dian Mangban's face darkened, twisting into a grimace. He naturally hadn't forgotten that night assault on the city. Even though he had personally led 2,000 some white braves to attack that massive city of steel, his abilities had still fallen short. From the start to the end of that battle, those firm gates had remained closed. It was clear that Wang Chong intended to play the same trick, moving everything up to the plateau. Just the thought of this stoked the flames of rage in Dian Mangban's heart. Interesting, the guest of honor is coming. As he looked down from the high city walls at Dian Mangban and his 10 some elites riding toward him in a cloud of dust, Wang Chong's lips curled into a smile. Let's go together and take a look. Going down the wall, Wang Chong mounted the white-hoofed shadow and led his subordinates to the front of his army. In this tense atmosphere, the movements of both commanders instantly attracted everyone's attention. Hooves thundered across the earth as the two parties drew close. At a distance of around 100 zhang from Wang Chong's forces, Dian Mangban and his party of 10 some white brave elites came to a stop, their horses stomping at the ground while snorting. Dian Mangban sat like a lofty mountain on a snow-white steed with blood-red hooves, gifted to him by the great snow mountain. His cold gaze was as sharp as a sword as it scanned the defenses Wang Chong had laid out in front of the triangular gap, carefully taking in every steel wall, every opening. No detail could escape his eyes as he attempted to find the best area to break through. In this entire process, Dian Mangban did not make a single noise, but he exuded an invisible pressure that chilled everyone to the bone. Lord Marquis, this is Dian Mangban? Suddenly, a vigorous voice came from Wang Chong's forces. While Dian Mangban had been taking stock of Wang Chong, another mountain of a figure was taking his measure. At the front of the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry, Li Sai and Wang Chong stood side by side, their gazes cold and stern. During Dian Mangban's raid on Wuxiang, Li Sai had not been at the City of Steel, but in Wuxiang village training the recruits. It was for this reason that upon his return, he had felt a deep sense of guilt and self-criticism. For Wang Chong's bodyguard and closest follower, to be missing at such a crucial moment was a massive dereliction of duty. Fortunately, Wang Chong had been able to rely on his abilities to escape the lethal strike and frighten away Dian Mangban. Otherwise, if something more serious had happened, Li Sai would probably never be able to forgive himself. The best method to compensate for this mistake was killing Dian Mangban and cutting off his head. Haha! Yes, that's him. Wang Chong smiled and nodded. In the time between their meetings, Dian Mangban's aura had grown even more vigorous. It seemed like he had made some substantial progress in his martial arts. Alas, no matter how much progress he had made, his death was certain today. Li Sai, don't get careless, Wang Chong indifferently said as he looked into the distance. Dian Mangban is a Tibetan brigadier general, second only to individuals like Fuming Lingcha and Dusong Mangpoj. Take a look. Even though the Qixi Protectorate army is so close by, he doesn't care. In addition, his plans are bold and imaginative, and he doesn't operate according to common sense. Although he suffered a setback at Wuxiang, he wasn't dejected at all by his failure. On the contrary, before going back, he turned around and attacked the Qixi Protectorate army, killing Pulin He. In summary, this fellow is extremely difficult to deal with. You must be careful. This subordinate understands, Li Sai grunted, but his face showed no emotion. His eyes were fixed on Dian Mangban. The atmosphere was deathly still, the two commanders silently standing across from each other. Interesting. Seeing that Dian Mangban was doing nothing, neither advancing nor retreating, only sitting there on his horse with that gloomy expression, Wang Chong inwardly smiled and lightly urged his horse forward. As he rode out from the opening in the steel walls, he instantly grabbed the attention of everyone present. Even the distant Fuming Lingcha couldn't help but look over. "My lord, this boy is quite bold," someone softly whispered by Fuming Lingcha's side. "Isn't he afraid that Dian Mangban will suddenly explode forward and try to kill him? After all, Dian Mangban is a brigadier general. Fuming Lingcha creased his brow in thought for a few moments. It's not that he's not afraid, but that he believes that Dian Mangban won't do anything. Although he hoped that Wang Chong's judgment was wrong and wished to see Dian Mangban ride forward and kill Wang Chong. Fuming Lingcha was well aware that 8 or 9 times out of 10, Wang Chong's judgment was correct. It wasn't because Dian Mangban was a benevolent soul, but because this scion of the Wang clan had many clever tricks up his sleeve and was much more difficult to deal with than most. If it were so easy, then Dian Mangban would have succeeded on his first try. Fuming Lingcha clenched his teeth and coldly declared, "Keep a close watch. Tell Heba Yi that the moment the brat is killed, the army will move out, fight for a while, and then immediately retreat. When the time comes, we can not only cast off all the blame, we can even submit a memorial pushing all the blame to that boy and the Wang clan backing him." Yes, a subordinate immediately left with the order. Fuming Lingcha nodded at this before turning back around to continue his observations. He truly didn't care if Dian Mangban chose this moment to strike or not, because Wang Chong's fate was already decided. With his meager force, Dian Mangban and Dusong Mangpoj would be more than enough to ensure his death. Fuming Lingcha simply couldn't imagine how Wang Chong could possibly emerge alive from this situation. Enjoy it while you can. A price must be paid for the rashness of youth. A cold light glimmered in Fuming Lingcha's eyes, and then they regained their calm. "Dian Mangban, we meet again. Did you get my gift?" Wang Chong slowly trotted his horse forward, smirking. "Buzz." At these words, Dian Mangban's complexion instantly turned dark, a fierce anger emerging in his eyes. He naturally knew what Wang Chong was talking about. The gift Wang Chong spoke of was undoubtedly the 27,000 soldiers of Zhangsheng training camp and the Dian clan's Dian Pugil. "There's no need to worry. You'll quickly be receiving my gift as well." Dian Mangban rode his horse forward, coldly staring at Wang Chong, a savage glow in his eyes. "Ha ha ha. Then I look forward to it." Wang Chong heartily chuckled. He wasn't worried that Dian Mangban would strike, but rather that he wouldn't. After all, he still had the threat to Qixi mission to complete. Just his words and Dian Mangban's personality ensured that Dian Mangban would not lightly choose to retreat. "Oh, by the way, Dian Mangban, besides you, I've also prepared a gift for the Yusang Empire. Do you see that fortress behind me? In the future, these fortresses will extend all the way into the interior of the plateau, right up to the Tsenpo's royal capital. I've always respected His Majesty the Tsenpo, so I plan to build this sort of fortress outside the royal capital to express my respect." Impudent! At these words, Dian Mangban's eyes grew even colder, even more brimming with rage. Even Dusong Mangpoj at the rear of the army had to slightly frown at these words. Wang Chong was clearly making a naked threat, and unlike his conflict with Dian Mangban, this was a threat aimed straight at the Tsenpo of the Yusang Empire. In the Yusang Empire, the Tsenpo held supreme status as a manifestation of a god. Any Tibetan commander would find it impossible to bear Wang Chong's words. "Brat, you're seeking death." Dian Mangban closed his eyes and took in a deep breath. No one had ever dared to act so brashly in front of him before. In the past, his opponents would all be trembling in fear, and even Pulin He's face before his death had been stricken with fear, his entire body trembling. Dian Mangban had never experienced such a challenging foe. "All recklessness has a price to pay. I will definitely crush your corpse under the hooves of my horse, lop off your head, and then display it on the edge of the plateau so that all Tang know what will happen to those who challenge me. Ha ha ha! I'm different from you. Killing you is just a part of the process, not the goal. In the future, I will eradicate all the forces the Yusang Empire has bordering Qixi, completely resolving any threats to it. Not only that, I will thrust the banner of the Great Tang into the heart of Yusang, toppling it over so as to show everyone what happens to enemies of the Great Tang." Wang Chong gave a roar of laughter. "Buzz!" In the rear of the army, Dusong Mangpoj, who had originally been putting all his attention on Fuming Lingcha, couldn't help but deeply frown at Wang Chong's words. And the distant Fuming Lingcha also couldn't help but frown. "Milord!" Several of the Qixi scouts by Fuming Lingcha's side seemed to brighten up and subconsciously glance at Fuming Lingcha. Although Wang Chong was their opponent, even they, as soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army, couldn't help but admire him for these words. Everyone, shut up, Fuming Lingcha harshly rebuked, his face gloomy. He naturally knew what these subordinates were thinking, but this only served to stimulate his jealousy and killing intent. No matter what, this brat can't be allowed to survive. Fuming Lingcha clenched his fists, causing his knuckles to crack. The more outstanding Wang Chong was, the greater a threat he posed to the Hu. He could not be allowed to live. But Fuming Lingcha had no idea that there was a person at this time who wanted to kill Wang Chong even more. If Dian Mangban was just angry at the start, by now he was on the verge of going insane. Wang Chong, if you wanted to provoke me, then you've succeeded. I've changed my mind now. I won't let you easily die. You care a lot about Qixi, right? I will kill each and every soldier of Qixi and make the Great Tang's Qixi Protectorate nothing more than a part of history. Dian Mangban smiled savagely. Let's go. Dian Mangban almost immediately turned his horse around and left. Behind him, the white braves followed, the hooves of their horses clopping against the ground as they galloped off. Sukai, tell all troops to get ready. A major battle will soon be upon us. Wang Chong narrowed his eyes as he watched Dian Mangban leave. Yes, Lord Marquis. Sukai turned and left with the order. Li Sai, there's no going back. We must kill Dian Mangban, Wang Chong said, continuing to look forward. Lord Marquis, this general will do everything possible to carry out this order, Li Sai sternly replied. Wang Chong nodded and continued to silently look in the direction Dian Mangban had left. Dian Mangban was a madman, and once he locked onto a target, he would madly attack it. In the past, this was precisely how the Qixi Protectorate's armies had been exhausted, and it was this trait that resulted in the mission The Threat to Qixi. Dian Mangban's final words before leaving had stirred many thoughts in Wang Chong. Wang Chong's greatest concern right now was that his own actions had led to a far earlier onset of Dian Mangban's madness. There was no retreat now. If he wanted to avert Dian Mangban's crazed actions and prevent the Qixi Protectorate from walking the same path to destruction, he had to exterminate Dian Mangban here. Hiya! Wang Chong urged his horse on, turning it around and riding back to his army. On the other side, around 2,000 zhang away, Dian Mangban returned to his own army, and countless gazes began to focus on him, all of them waiting in the somber atmosphere for Dian Mangban to give the order. Milord, shall we attack? A Tibetan general said, a vicious and murderous light in his eyes. Do not rush. Without my order, no one is allowed to recklessly act. To the surprise of his generals, Dian Mangban waved his hand and rejected the proposal. His gaze was cold, and his emotionless eyes were still fixed on the silvery white walls of the fortress. General! The surrounding officers were all dumbstruck. Dian Mangban had just returned with a frightening grimace, so everyone believed that he would immediately give the order to attack. Instead, he had made the exact opposite decision. Dian Mangban said nothing, gave no explanation. His expression was cold and calm, making it impossible for anyone to tell what he was thinking. At this moment, the only people who could remain composed and at ease were those white brave officers who had followed Dian Mangban through his many campaigns. That brat was intentionally trying to provoke Milord, but this will only lead to his destruction. The white brave officers followed Dian Mangban's gaze. All of them had heard that conversation loud and clear. That young marquis had been intentionally provoking their commander, and truthfully, he had succeeded. But if he believed that angering their commander would let him succeed, then he was gravely mistaken. Mad did not mean impulsive, and it certainly didn't mean stupid, at least not in their commander's case. These white brave officers had followed Dian Mangban through many campaigns, so they were extremely familiar with his personality. The angrier and crazier he was, the calmer and more rational he would be. This was how their commander could become Imperial Brigadier General and Azura of the Plateau, not Madman of the Plateau. Zurin, have you finished preparing the things I asked of you? Dian Mangban suddenly said, his eyes still fixed on those walls, his voice frigid. A Tibetan officer in his early 30s, whose face bore that characteristic flush of the plateau, bowed and said in Tibetan, replying to my lord, "It's all ready. The several dozen tribes around the northern border have received my lord's orders and left several hours ago. They should arrive soon." "Very good. Wait for my order," Dian Mangban said. "Yes, my lord," Zurin said. All was quiet, and an invisible tension was slowly strengthening, pulling the atmosphere tighter and tighter. At this moment, everyone was waiting for Dian Mangban's order. "Brat, you'll definitely regret your actions. Only death will be able to purify the idiocy in your body." Dian Mangban's complexion was ashen, but his eyes glimmered with madness. Dian Mangban was extremely clear on what Wang Chong was doing and why he was doing it. Only a fool like Buluhu would charge heedlessly into that array of steel walls. The strongest formation of the Tibetan cavalry was the echelon formation, and no empire understood this formation more than the Yusang Empire. If the formation fell into chaos, then what might would it have to speak of? And those steel walls, Dian Mangban had not forgotten that in the southwest, Daluan Ruozan and Huashu Huaitsong had lost to these steel walls. If Wang Chong thought that provoking Dian Mangban would make him heedlessly charge in, then he was truly looking down on him. He definitely would attack, but not in the way Wang Chong imagined. "Lord Marquis, they still haven't attacked." In the triangular gap, Li Sai was observing the Tibetan army. Wang Chong nodded, his brow slightly furrowed and his face solemn. "This Dian Mangban is even harder to deal with than we imagined. I originally thought that given the momentum he had come with and his advantage in numbers, he would quickly give the order to attack. It seems like I've underestimated him." When Dian Mangban had left, his eyes had been frightening and spitting rage. Even a blind man could notice that. Yet after all this time, the Tibetan warhorses were still neighing and whinnying, but they still showed no signs of attacking. "No wonder he's the threat to Chishi. It's no easy task to kill him off," Wang Chong quietly said to himself. Dian Mangban was far calmer than imagined, but this was in no way good news. However, the more outstanding Dian Mangban was, the more Wang Chong wanted to kill him. A person who could act crazily but still maintain a cool head was definitely a powerful foe of the Great Tang. For Chishi and the Central Plains, Wang Chong had to think of a way to kill him. "Moo!" As he was thinking, a strange cry suddenly came from the other side. On this somber battlefield, these cries were abnormally loud. Wang Chong turned his head to look and saw that the vast Tibetan army had fallen into turmoil. Meanwhile, at the front of the Tibetan army, Dian Mangban gave Wang Chong a glance, a strange light flashing in his eyes, and then he pulled on his reins and swiftly vanished into the army. "Lord Marquis, there's something wrong. This isn't the sound of war horses," Su Kai suddenly said. In a battle, both sides would usually ride horses, so it was very strange for the sounds of beasts other than war horses to be heard, and yet those cries from before definitely did not belong to war horses. "They truly aren't war horses," Wang Chong sternly said, his expression grave. Su Kai had only heard that something was wrong, but Wang Chong could already tell what had made the sound. "Those are the Tibetan yaks." Rumble. As if responding to Wang Chong's voice, the ground suddenly began to quake and a rumble came from the opposing side. 2,000 zhang away, the vast Tibetan army parted, revealing thousands upon thousands of black yaks, roaring and stomping, their sharp horns aimed at the distant steel walls as they charged. "Moo!" The thousands of black yaks were bulging with muscle, their moos rising and falling in waves. Behind them, a massive cloud of dust plumed into the air. At this moment, everyone paled. "Lord Marquis!" In their shock, everyone turned to Wang Chong. In this standard battle of cavalry, no one had expected the Tibetans to use this tactic. These yaks that were native to the plateau had massive bodies, sharp horns, and muscular physiques. At full charging speed, each of them could strike with the weight of nearly 1,000 jin. If these thousands of yaks charged through the openings in the steel walls, just the first wave alone would be sufficient to throw the Tang formation into chaos. "Lord Marquis, these yaks have their ears blocked," Chang Sanyuan said, his expression fraught with concern. He had participated with Wang Chong in the War of the Southwest, and when Zheluofeng had used the elephants that lived in Meng Shizhao's forest to charge, Wang Chong had used lions' roars to frighten and alarm them. In the end, these elephants had turned around and wreaked havoc on the Mengshi Yusang army. But this tactic would have no effect this time. Yaks already had long and thick fur that somewhat blocked their ears, reducing the effectiveness of any sonic attacks. And these yaks also had their ears blocked by something. It was obvious that Dian Mangban and the others had already received their lessons from the southwest and prepared themselves for this move. The air was tense as everyone felt the sound of the charging yaks thundering against their hearts, and they all subconsciously turned to Wang Chong. That brat from the Wang clan is probably doomed. In the distance, Fuming Lingcha was observing the battlefield. Although Fuming Lingcha also hated Dian Mangban down to his bones, wanting nothing more than to personally behead him, he had to admit that this madman of Yusang was truly quite formidable. The other commanders of Yusang would heedlessly charge as long as they had the advantage in numbers, with the deceased Buluhu serving as a representative case. But Dian Mangban was different. He seemed crazy and irritable, his actions completely out of line with common sense, but he was also terrifying in all other aspects as well. Even though he had the White Braves and 40 to 50,000 additional soldiers, in a situation of seemingly overwhelming victory, he could still endure. He had even mobilized thousands of yaks to serve as his vanguard. If Fuming Lingcha were in Wang Chong's place, even he would have little luck in surviving such meticulous planning. Wang Chong's only option was to retreat from the triangular gap and return to Wuxiang. But if he did that, those 8,000 to 9,000 craftsmen would become ghosts under Tibetan hooves. If that boy truly dared to do such a thing, Fuming Lingcha would be able to submit memorials criticizing him to death. Ha! They say that if the heavens sin, then one can still survive. But if you bring disaster on yourself, your death is certain. Fuming Lingcha sneered as he looked to Wang Chong and his 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry as if they were already corpses. He felt no sympathy for Wang Chong. With no understanding of his own strength, he had dared to step onto the plateau, so this result was far too predictable. And besides, this brat dared to be his enemy. "My lord, look over there." A cry of alarm came from his side. His eyes widening, Fuming Lingcha raised his head and saw that the situation had changed yet again. Behind the first wave of yaks, several thousand special cavalry had galloped to the front of Dian Mangban's army. These cavalry had large white bags hanging off the left and right sides of their horses. As they rode forward, they thrust their hands into the bags and heaved. Whoosh! In a flash, clouds of white powder were thrown into the air, to be carried along by the wind and shroud the plateau in a white fog. In the blink of an eye, the wind had caught up to the galloping yak herd and continued to expand. In a few seconds, this white fog had shrouded the area, somewhat obstructing Fuming Lingcha's vision. Boom! The vigorous and mournful yak horns began to blow. The cries of thousands of horses began to ring out from within the white fog, and the earth rumbled as Dian Mangban's army began to move. What was a tiny tremble at first swiftly transformed into fierce shuddering as the Tibetan cavalry charged. Buzz! Even Fuming Lingcha couldn't help but widen his eyes, his face paling at the sight. Yaks in the vanguard, the white fog as a shroud, and the army following close behind. Dian Mangban's attacks came in wave after wave. These attacks were like a furious storm, and it seemed like only one wave would be sufficient to crush Wang Chong, his 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry, and the 8,000-some craftsmen behind him into the dust. Fuming Lingcha turned his head and fiercely ordered, "Inform Heba Yi to quicken the pace of the army. We need to be ready to enter the battlefield at any time." "Yes, my lord." A horseman took off. Dian Mangban had invested his entire army in this one assault to eliminate Wang Chong, and once his formation fell into chaos, the Qixi Protectorate army would have a superb chance to enter the battle. "Lord Marquis." In the distance, unease pervaded the air while everyone waited for Wang Chong's decision. The thundering of the yak charge was deafening, and they were so close now that it was difficult to carry out any sort of conversation. In addition, the white powder had spread so rapidly that even their steel fortress had been affected. This fog was so thick that even cultivators at Sukai and Changsanyuan's level could only see around 10 meters in front of them. The yaks, white powder, and the tens of thousands of Tibetan cavalry in the rear, the Wuxian cavalry were in an extremely dangerous situation. Wang Chong said nothing. Dian Mangban was far more troublesome and frightening than he had imagined. Dian Mangban seemed insane, but his thought process was very meticulous. He had decided to use a yak stampede to deal with Wang Chong's beehives. Not only that, he had even used the direction of the wind and the white powder to create a fog that shrouded the battlefield. This white fog made it difficult for Wang Chong's formations to show any power. Without a target, the cavalry were like headless chickens, their power greatly reduced. More importantly, the Tibetan army was behind the yak herd, its speed crazily rising. If Wang Chong wanted to counter them, he would need to charge out from the steel walls, but that would bring him into a collision with the thousands of yaks. In this situation, Wang Chong's cavalry would be halved before he had even fought with Dian Mangban. Dian Mangban had given him a very difficult problem. Wang Chong continued to say nothing. He could hear all their voices and sense the unease of the army, but Wang Chong remained calm and emotionless. The more critical the situation, the calmer he was. No matter what tactic Dian Mangban used or what trick he played, Wang Chong would never yield, never lose. Rumble. The quaking intensified, and the thundering hooves seemed to be stomping on his heart. 100 zhang, 80 zhang, 60 zhang. The thousands of yaks that Dian Mangban had made into his vanguard were charging closer and closer. Wang Chong could even smell the unique odor of the yaks through the white fog. The atmosphere was growing tenser and tenser. Sniff! Suddenly, Wang Chong's nostrils flared and he raised his head to the white fog in the air. A strange feeling in his mind. This smell. It's barley flour. In that last moment, Wang Chong's eyes brightened and he began to smile. This was called being too smart for one's own good. To deal with him, Dian Mangban had prepared both the yaks and the white powder, but to deal with him, the best method would have been to use lime. Unfortunately, the plateau didn't have much lime, so Dian Mangban had used barley flour as a substitute. The Tibetans raised livestock and planted barley for a living, and barley was their sole crop. Thus, it was the object that could most easily replace lime. There was nothing wrong with the idea, but alas, Dian Mangban had run into Wang Chong. Li Sai have the entire army dismount. When they hear the signal, all men and horses should immediately get down. Wang Chong suddenly said, his eyes glowing with vim and vigor. Ah! The surrounding officers were dumbfounded. The enemy yaks were charging over, the army close behind them. If they were to get to the ground at a moment like this, wouldn't they just be waiting to get trampled? But, Lord Marquis, Dian Mangban is already coming, Su Shixian worriedly said. Although the others said nothing, their eyes were just as concerned. These officers had always been very trusting of Wang Chong, but this order was far too unreasonable. The Tibetan assault did not consist solely of the yaks. In these few short moments, the cries of the Tibetan army in the rear were already audible. Even if they chose to endure the yak charge by lying on the ground and hiding behind the steel walls, they wouldn't be able to avoid the Tibetan army in the back. For cavalry to be dismounted and on the ground at a crucial moment like this would be suicidal. This wasn't something as simple as the lives and deaths of 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. Once they lost, the 8,000-some craftsmen behind them in the fortress would meet their end as well. There are no buts. Do as I say, Wang Chong firmly ordered, his eyes still aimed forward. Yes. Su Shixian clenched his teeth and left to pass on the order. Although he still felt that Wang Chong's order was very improper, since Wang Chong was sure about it, Su Shixian would not object. 50 zhang, 40 zhang, 30 zhang, 20 zhang. The heartstrings of every person were pulled taut. Through the thick white fog, it was possible to see the flaring nostrils of the yaks, as well as their bell-like copper eyes blazing with madness. Their massive bodies and hunched backs were like thousands of miniature mountains. Moo! The yaks called out like a massive wave crashing over the earth. And even more frightening were the frenzied shouts of the thousands of Tibetan cavalry behind them. Everyone, hear my order. Follow the yak herd and kill all the Tang to avenge the mountain army. Anyone who dares to build a fort on the plateau is digging their own grave. Everyone, follow me. General has ordered that anyone who kills the brat called Wang Chong will be made a general and granted a supreme technique from the Great Snow Mountain. No Tang is permitted to escape. Forward! The thousands of Tibetan cavalry brandished their scimitars and yowled. Although the white fog was just as effective against them, all the Tibetans needed to do was take up echelon formation, cover their mouths and noses with cloth, and follow behind the yak herd. The only fate awaiting those who dared to disgrace the general was death. Brat, did you really think that you would be safe behind your walls? Everything has a price, and this time, I'll let everyone know what happens to anyone who dares to oppose me and challenge Yusang. In the center of the army, Dian Mangban was riding his divine steed from the Great Snow Mountain, his eyes shining with a savage and crazed light. No matter how Wang Chong responded, in the end, he would find it impossible to escape death. He could already imagine the scene of Wang Chong being beheaded, his head stuck upon a spear and displayed on the edge of the plateau to serve as a warning to the rest of the Great Tang. All soldiers, hear my order. Full speed charge. Dian Mangban shouted out, and the army immediately picked up speed, thunderously rumbling across the earth. Buzz! The quaking of the ground intensified, the grass of the plateau rustling and trembling, and as the army got closer, the atmosphere grew tenser. 10 zhang, 8 zhang, 6 zhang, 4 zhang. Rumble! Finally, the thousands of mooing yaks frenziedly charged in between the steel walls. The atmosphere had grown so tense that even time seemed to have stopped. Get down! A sharp cry cut through the sky, and at the same moment, at the rear of the Tang army, a bowstring twanged. A long arrow shot forward like a bolt of lightning from the steel fortress, headed straight for the middle of the Tibetan army. And the tiny flame at the arrow tip was dazzling to the extreme. Boom! After what seemed like both a second and like endless epochs, a massive explosion filled the sky, with countless fearful eyes bearing witness. A scarlet fireball, as dazzling as the sun, rapidly expanded in the air. As if this was the signal to begin, the white fog that permeated the entire battlefield began to explode, the massive sound suppressing all other noise, the mooing, the shouting, and the thundering of hooves across the earth. All these sounds were insignificant before these explosive booms, like the buzzing of mosquitoes compared to peals of thunder. The fierce explosions also caused a fierce shaking, and those crazed charging yaks screamed as they were sent flying into the air like weightless weeds. This sudden change caught the Tibetan cavalry following the yaks completely by surprise. Aya! Screams filled the air as the Tibetans and their steeds were also thrown back by the explosions. Some people were flung into the air, where the continuous explosions pulverized their bodies. Others were thrown down to the grass, and though they seemed fine on the surface, their internal organs had been shattered by the impacts, and they were bleeding from every orifice, causing them to die on the spot. Moreover, the explosions had also triggered a massive fire. The entire battlefield, including Wang Chong's steel fortress in the rear, had transformed into an unprecedented sea of fire. All the air in the battlefield, and even the air in the lungs of the Tibetan cavalry, was completely burned away. Before those Tibetan cavalry even had time to react, they had already suffocated to death on their horses. Boom, boom, boom. One explosion came after another, and the battlefield transformed into a cacophony of screams, whinnies, and mooing. Impossible! How could there be something like this? In the distance, Fuming Lingcha, who had personally witnessed this scene, was trembling all over, momentarily at a loss for words. As an elite great general of the Great Tang Empire and one of the leading Hu commanders, Fuming Lingcha had spent a life on the battlefield, experiencing all sorts of tactics and strategies. But not even Fuming Lingcha had ever seen anything like this. He had already ordered Heba Yi to bring the army to the edge of the battlefield. With a single order, he could avail himself of the chaos that would come after Dian Mangban's Tibetan army eliminated Wang Chong to charge in from the side. But Fuming Lingcha had never predicted a situation like this. With just a few arrows, Wang Chong had created a massive explosion and a terrifying sea of fire, and he had personally witnessed it. Although Fuming Lingcha was very far from the battlefield, he could still sense the searing waves of heat. Massive waves were raging in Fuming Lingcha's mind, and he was overcome by an unprecedented shock. This scene had completely surpassed common sense, had exceeded everything he knew about the world. Even though Fuming Lingcha was an imperial great general, even though he had witnessed the entire process, he still had no idea how all this had happened. Not even an imperial great general was capable of understanding this scene. Kyle! While Fuming Lingcha was still lost in thought, the sky was suddenly filled with fierce shouts that shook the steppe. After this wave of explosions, Wang Chong finally led his Wuxiang cavalry forward. His warhorse neighing and his robes flapping in the air, Wang Chong was the first to ride out from the cover of the silver-white walls. Behind him, all the Wuxiang cavalry had mounted their horses and taken up formation, following Wang Chong as quickly as lightning. Wang Chong and his forces had also been in the range of the explosions, but Wang Chong had ordered all of them to get down on the ground along with their horses and use the steel walls, so they had suffered few injuries. As for the steel fortress in the rear, its 6 Shanghai walls had kept out the white barley flour, so the craftsmen within had also succeeded in escaping the disaster. All troops attack! Wang Chong unsheathed his sword as his shout, cold and firm as steel, echoed through the skies. Rumble! The earth shuddered as the 5,000 Wuxiang together with the 1,000-some veteran elites from the southwest surged out from behind the steel walls, seething with killing intent. At this very moment, the explosions stopped, the sea of fire extinguished. All the barley flour had been burned away, and the white fog no longer shrouded the battlefield. The entire situation became clear. For nearly 1,000 zhang in front of the steel walls that Wang Chong had erected, the ground was covered in corpses. The scorched corpses of yaks were splayed out on the ground. In the massive explosion and sea of fire, their thick black fur had become a lethal flaw. The fallen yaks were completely naked, all their fur burned away. They had suffered the greatest impact from the explosions. Behind these yaks were countless Tibetan corpses. These valiant warriors of the plateau had all been mounted on stalwart highland steeds, and because they were standing higher, they had suffered more from the shockwaves and explosions in the air. But the mental impact was even greater. Even now, none of the Tibetans knew what had occurred, and the mere thought of the explosion left them trembling in fear. No matter what the Tibetans were thinking, Wang Chong's plan had already succeeded. The 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry and the 1,000 veterans from the southwest had formed into the arrow formation and were energetically charging out from behind the steel walls. Whoosh! There was a cold flash of light as a sharp sword cut through the air. A Tibetan horseman who was closest to the walls, still stupefied and confused, was beheaded before he could react. His head sent flying into the air. And this was only the beginning. Rumble! The thousands of Wuxiang cavalry charged forward, unstoppable. Wang Chong had chosen precisely the moment where the Tibetans were most disorganized and their morale at their lowest, even their speed having drastically dropped. At this moment, their rout was truly like a landslide. Aya! The Tibetan cavalry were felled like reaped wheat, many of them still confused and dazed as they were cleaved apart. On one side were elite troops who were organized and energetic, while on the other side were a spent force, panicked and demoralized. The latter were not even able to take a single blow, collapsing at first contact. Dian Mangban, come. Let's put it all in this single clash. Wang Chong rode his white-hoofed shadow forward, heartily laughing as he charged through the battlefield. With a swish of his Wu's steel sword, a Tibetan was instantly beheaded. With a slash, a scimitar was broken and a Tibetan and his mount cleaved in two. To an expert on Wang Chong's level of the imperial martial realm, a Wu's steel weapon could ascend to a whole new level of power. But Wang Chong's gaze was always focused on the distant Dian Mangban. Dian Mangban was hailed as the Azura god of the Yusang Empire. While appearing rough and crude, he was actually a very meticulous man who always came prepared. In order to deal with Wang Chong, he had found yaks to form his vanguard and barley flour to shroud the battlefield. Alas, his cleverness had gotten the better of him. Dian Mangban had no idea that using barley flour to form a fog could very easily create a dust explosion. When the concentration of barley flour in the air reached a certain level, when bits of barley flour were floating everywhere, the situation was a perfect recipe for disaster. A tiny flame would be enough to create a heaven-shaking boom. To Wang Chong this was common sense, but the people of this world clearly had no knowledge of this principle. And Wang Chong's plan had succeeded. As for its effect, everyone could see it. Bastard! Dian Mangban clenched his fists, the veins on the back of his hand bulging out and his teeth grinding against each other. Madness, anger, and an irrepressible killing intent. These emotions exploded out of his eyes. If looks could kill, Wang Chong would have been killed 1,000 times over. I will definitely kill you. Definitely kill you. Dian Mangban's gaze was locked onto Wang Chong, and he had the impulse to heedlessly charge forward, relying on his Saint Martial Realm cultivation to end Wang Chong with a single thrust of his spear. But the memories from the City of Steel were still fresh, and he knew that though Wang Chong was weaker than him, he had many tricks like joint attacks and rotational tactics that would give pause to even a Saint Martial expert. Wang Chong didn't have just 200-some experts this time, but 5,000-some elites, an even more impressive force. Meanwhile, Dian Mangban's army was in complete panic after that unprecedented explosion, its morale completely drained and completely unable to contend against Wang Chong's army. Withdraw! Although he was extremely unwilling, Dian Mangban still clenched his teeth and issued the order to retreat. Rumble! Like a landslide, the already demoralized Tibetan army immediately fell to pieces when Dian Mangban sounded the retreat. Pursue! The Tang were invigorated by this sight. Rumble! The halo of Dusk Stallion descended, immediately buffing the army. The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry pressed forward in pursuit. Aya! Miserable screams filled the air as the Wuxian cavalry mowed the fleeing Tibetans down. 5,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000. When 5,000 Wuxian cavalry charged in formation, they displayed a killing efficiency never before seen in this world. The dense ranks of the Tibetan cavalry were scattered in a single wave, and while some Tibetans attempted to group up and cover the retreat, they were swiftly crushed. Hurry! Dian Mangban's fierce shout resounded over the battlefield. Against Wang Chong's 5,000 Wuxian cavalry in charging formation, not even a Saint Martial expert like him dared to stick around, much less others. Anyone who dared to stop was essentially committing suicide, and they wouldn't even be able to delay Wang Chong's forces, much less stop them. Boom! When the Tibetan army was in the greatest danger, a horn blared across the battlefield. This horn was a little different from previous ones. It was even louder and imbued with a grandeur, righteousness, and dignity. At the same time, the earth began to rumble as something began to head toward the rear of the Tibetan army. Stop! Wang Chong was leading the charge from the front, and when he heard that unusual horn, he immediately raised his right hand and ordered the halt, a wary expression on his face. The earth trembled and the grass rustled as a black tide surged out from behind Dian Mangban's collapsing army. Yet another army of the Yusang Empire had emerged. From a distance, Wang Chong could clearly make out the tall black battle standard emblazoned with the white eagle, together with the image of a vast snowy mountain. It's Dusong Mangpoj! Wang Chong's heart chilled as he immediately recognized the war banner. In all of the plateau, there was only one person that Wang Chong recalled used the image of a white eagle as his war banner. The eagle of the plateau, Dusong Mangpoj. Withdraw! Wang Chong waved his right hand down, immediately ordering a retreat. Dusong Mangpoj was a great general of the Yusang Empire, even stronger than Dian Mangban. Although Wang Chong was not surprised at his appearance, this moment was not the time for their final clash. Rumble! As soon as he gave the order, Wang Chong turned his horse around. Behind him, the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry halted their pursuit and immediately began to gallop back to the steel fortress in the triangular gap. This brat! He's got quite the fast reaction. In the distance, Dusong Mangpoj saw this retreat and half-closed his eyes. If Wang Chong had dared to pursue, he wouldn't have minded killing him with a single blow. But Wang Chong had been extremely sensitive. Before Dusong Mangpoj had even arrived, he had ordered his army to retreat, and not even Dusong Mangpoj could do anything about that. It seems that it's not the time to kill him yet. I have to wait a little longer, Dusong Mangpoj muttered. This was not his first meeting with Wang Chong. That had been in the capital of the Great Tang, where Dusong Mangpoj had used the civet cat for Crown Prince Plan 1, having one of his formidable subordinates take the place of the first prince so that he could kill many experts in the capital of the Great Tang. In the end, however, Wang Chong had exposed this plan and even revealed Dusong Mangpoj's identity. He was pursued by Great Tang experts all the way back to Yusang and was almost forced into remaining in the Central Plains. The experience had left a very deep impression on Dusong Mangpoj. But the youth from the Great Tang capital had been even more formidable than he had imagined. Huashu Huaitsong and Daluan Ruozhen had been defeated in the southwest. The heroic Dian Pugiel of the Dian clan had been slain at Zhangzheng, and even Dian Mangban had lost to him. That intelligent youth from the Great Tang's capital was rapidly maturing into a threat for the Yusang Empire, a lurking menace. But even though his heart was seething with murderous intent, he had to be patient. With an imperial great general of the Great Tang like Fuming Lingcha present, Dusong Mangpoj had to control himself. Fuming Lingcha, what are you up to? Do you want me to kill him or not? Dusong Mangpoj aimed one final and profound glance at Fuming Lingcha before returning his focus to the battlefield. Give the signal for withdrawal. The army was currently in chaos. If they wanted to remove that barrier the Great Tang had set up along the triangular gap, they first had to reorganize. As the Tibetan army gave the signal for withdrawal, the first battle came to an end. In the distance, the Qixi Protectorate army was stupefied. This boy is far too formidable. Did he plan on that explosion? If so, then that's just too shocking. Dian Mangban is definitely kicking himself now. This boy is far harder to deal with than he thought. A real opponent for him. The twists and turns of this battle had caught all the Qixi soldiers by surprise, and all the officers were stunned by the result. These were fierce generals of the Qixi Protectorate army, frontline veterans with abundant battlefield experience, who had experienced all sorts of tribulations. But even these proud Qixi generals had to admit that if they were in Wang Chong's position, it would have been impossible to survive Dian Mangban's frenzied assaults. Everyone, shut up! Hearing his generals make such tactless comments infuriated Fuming Lingcha. Had these bastards forgotten who their enemy was? They would dare praise Wang Chong in a place like this. Do all of you have nothing to do? All of you go and inspect the troops. Make sure they're ready to enter the battle at any moment. Yes, the generals shuddered, hurriedly lowering their heads and taking off. Ha ha ha. While the other two sides were feeling suppressed, in the triangular gap, behind the silvery white walls of steel, the soldiers were exultant and full of energy. The 8,000-some craftsmen in the steel fortress had also poked their heads over the walls and were excitedly cheering. Lord Marquis! Lord Marquis! Lord Marquis! The cheers echoed through the skies, and Fuming Lingcha, Dian Mangban, and the Tibetans could only grimace. Lord Marquis, how did you manage to do that? Why did that white fog suddenly explode? After the battle, Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Su Kai, and the other officers had gathered around Wang Chong, all of them peering at him curiously. The most interesting thing about this battle was that massive explosion that had shattered the Tibetan army. Even now, after the battle, that sight still felt like a miracle, and all of them could hardly believe it had happened. They all knew that Wang Chong had to have something to do with it, but no one knew how. Don't ask anymore. I'll naturally tell you all in the future, but the battle has only come to a temporary halt and is far from over. The Tibetans definitely won't give up so easily, Wang Chong said. Yes. Seeing that Wang Chong was serious, the officers dispelled their curiosity and lowered their heads. Li Sai, dispatch the scouts and take stock of the losses, Wang Chong said. This subordinate will send them now. Li Sai selected a few people, and several scouts quickly shot out from behind the walls. The casualty numbers for the battle were quickly reported. The Tibetans had left 5,000 to 6,000 yak corpses on the battlefield, and around 1,000 had survived and fled in panic. It would take many hours to recover them. But even if they could be recovered, they had lost the will to fight. In addition, the explosion and the subsequent charge of the Wuxian cavalry had inflicted losses of 18 to 19,000 on Dian Mangban's army. There were also probably 6 to 7,000 cavalry that had been heavily injured by the explosion. Meanwhile, Wang Chong's side had suffered minuscule casualties. This was a thorough and decisive victory. The only surprise was in the small steel fortress in the rear. 7 or 8 craftsmen had fallen from ladders during the explosion and been injured. In addition, 20-some people had lost their hearing from the shockwaves. These were the most serious casualties on Wang Chong's side. As for the soldiers, since they had received advance warning and gotten down on the ground, they had avoided the brunt of the explosion and had received only a few light scratches. When these numbers came out, everyone was dumbstruck. All of them turned to Wang Chong, their eyes bursting with admiration. "Don't get too happy just yet," Wang Chong indifferently said. "Someone of Dian Mangban's personality will be launching the next attack soon, and this one will be even more vicious and fierce. Haha, what do we have to be afraid of? With Lord Marquis here, it doesn't matter how powerful Dian Mangban is. He had so many soldiers just now, but he still had to retreat in bitter defeat. With such losses, he's even less of a match for Lord Marquis." "Agreed. Dian Mangban has lost twice now to Lord Marquis. Another attempt will just result in an even greater defeat. Every measure has its appropriate countermeasure. Given our strength, should we be afraid of him?" The generals all began to sound off with their opinions. The battle just now had been a great boost to their confidence, and they now had incredible faith in Wang Chong. Even if Wang Chong told them that he was now going to take them to conquer the entire Yusang Empire, they would probably take him at his word. Proud soldiers are bound to lose. Don't get careless. Wang Chong shook his head. His subordinates were drastically underestimating Dian Mangban. Although he had defeated Dian Mangban twice now, the first time had only been because he could keep Dian Mangban's soldiers outside the walls and deal with him alone using rotating teams and joint attack formations. The second time was because Dian Mangban's use of barley flour to create a thick white fog had a massive flaw, and Wang Chong was able to use the dust explosion to defeat him. Neither time was a proper exchange. If one concluded that Dian Mangban wasn't really all that much from these two victories, then one would be doing nothing more than digging their own grave. If this was all Dian Mangban was capable of, he would have never been capable of leaving the City of Steel in defeat and turning right around to kill 5,000 Qixi soldiers in Pulin He. And besides that, he certainly wouldn't have been worthy of triggering the Stone of Destiny to issue the threat to Qixi mission, with success resulting in a reward of 400 Destiny energy and failure leading to a loss of 2,000 Destiny energy. Moreover, this was the Azura war god of the Yusang Empire, the future king of generals. How could he possibly have such little ability? "Everyone, cease the chatter." A vigorous voice spoke up, silencing the other officers. "Lord Marquis speaks reason, and I sense as well that this Dian Mangban is truly an expert. A person who could think of using a yak herd as a vanguard is definitely not a simple person." Everyone began to turn to Li Sai. "Proud soldiers are doomed to defeat, and this battle involves us all, but also the 8,000-some craftsmen behind us and the safety of Qixi. Until this battle is over, not a single hint of carelessness is permitted," Li Sai sternly admonished. Wang Chong turned his head to glance at the towering figure of Li Sai and gave a subtle nod. Li Sai truly had the qualities of a top-class great general. No matter the occasion, he would never abandon his instincts as a commander. Even after the greatest victory, he was able to coldly analyze the situation and make the most rational judgment. "Everyone go and rest. Dian Mangban probably won't attack for the time being. In addition, tell the craftsmen in the rear to increase their speed and finish the third level. The time for this fortress to be used is getting closer and closer," Wang Chong said, his orders as firm as stone. The officers all assented and quickly withdrew. "Dian, how is it? Do you need me to come in?" 2,000-some zhang away, in the rear of the Tibetan army, another conversation was taking place, but the parties of this conversation were one Yusang Imperial Great General and one Brigadier General. The atmosphere was extremely grim. The defeat from just now had been far too massive. Even though Dusong Mangpoj was responsible for seeing to the rear and holding down Fuming Lingcha, He had not been able to ignore the situation. They had suffered an astonishing loss of nearly 20,000 cavalry. If one added on the 20,000 losses of Buluhu's army, the Tibetans had lost 40,000 cavalry in total. Even an imperial great general like Dusong Mangpoj would have to think carefully about how to explain this enormous number to the Tsenpo. There's no need. Dian Mangban immediately refused. I started this battle, so I have to personally bring it to a close. As for that Wang Chong, no matter what, I will kill him. I understand that Wang Chong a little, and he's certainly not an easy person to deal with, Dusong Mangpoj said. You also saw the battle just now. He's far craftier than we imagined. You alone might not be enough. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Dian Mangban, but Dian Mangban had already lost twice now, and the casualties had been large. He could not permit the soldiers that the Yusang Empire needed to conquer the world to be used in Dian Mangban's personal dispute. Wang Chong was a target that the Tsenpo needed killed, so if Dian Mangban could not deal with him, Dusong Mangpoj would have to do so himself. You're afraid that the losses just now were too great and I'm about to lose even more soldiers? Dian Mangban stared at Dusong Mangpoj, his eyes sharp. Dusong Mangpoj said nothing, but he gave a firm nod. As the commander-in-chief, there were some things he had to consider, and there was no need to hide them, even in front of Dian Mangban. Humph, if that's the case, you don't need to worry, because now, I plan to have my white braves personally take the field. I don't need any soldiers from you. Whether you agree or not, I will definitely kill that Wang Chong. With these final words and a sweep of his sleeve, Dian Mangban left. The blustery wind blew over the blast-ridden plateau, filling the air with a scorched scent. Behind the silvery white steel walls, Wang Chong sat cross-legged. By his side was the mountainous figure of Li Sai, acting as his sentinel. Even if I've defeated the Tibetans, killing a Saint martial expert like Dian Mangban is still difficult. A hand propped under his chin, Wang Chong gazed at the ground in thought. The mission the Stone of Destiny had given him required Wang Chong to personally kill Dian Mangban. Someone else killing Dian Mangban or Dian Mangban encountering some accident would not fulfill the requirements. If a situation like that occurred, the mission would be regarded as failed and he would lose 2,000 destiny energy. Even to the current Wang Chong, this was still a massive number. After all, after his desperate efforts to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, all the blood and sweat he had used to defeat Huashu Huaizong and Daluan Ruozhen and save the Southwest, he had only obtained 2,410 points of destiny energy from completing Empire's Dirge. The difference in cultivation is still a very large problem. I have to find a way to bring up my strength and close the distance. With a thought, Wang Chong communicated with the Stone of Destiny. Time was short, and it was impossible to raise his strength so quickly through normal methods, so he could only rely on the Stone of Destiny. One had to remember that he had not once used the large amount of destiny energy he had accumulated since the conclusion of his last mission. Moreover, after completing the Trial of Destiny, he had advanced from Destiny Struggler to Controller of Destiny. The Stone of Destiny had also undergone a large transformation, opening a new category of rewards that he could exchange for. Buzz! In the next moment, the scene in front of Wang Chong's eyes changed. Floating in the boundless darkness, a stone about the size of a fist appeared in front of him, seemingly plain yet also exuding powerful ripples in space-time. This was the Stone of Destiny. Wang Chong had been so busy with matters in reality that it had been a long time since he had carefully examined the Stone of Destiny. After all the events that had transpired, the Stone of Destiny seemed to have gotten larger, and also seemed to be a bit more dazzling and lustrous. This only made it seem more mysterious. 4030. On the upper right corner of the Stone of Destiny, Wang Chong saw a line of flickering golden numbers. This is the amount of destiny energy I've currently accumulated? The moment this thought crossed his mind, countless images began to flit past his eyes, carrying with them countless pieces of information. All the rewards from the War of the Southwest and the amount he had left over from before that totaled 2,410 points of destiny energy. Recruiting 5,000 Wushang soldiers from Wushang village had rewarded him with 600 points of destiny energy. For developing cement, he had obtained 1,000 points of destiny energy. Writing a letter to Gao Xianji and exposing heavenly knowledge had lost him 600 points. And finally, the Warhorse mission had rewarded him with 510 points of destiny energy. In sum, all his missions up to now had allowed him to accumulate 4,030 points of destiny energy. Wang Chong couldn't help but be astonished as he reviewed the information given by the Stone of Destiny. Unwittingly, he had managed to accumulate an impressive sum of destiny energy. With this much, I should have enough to exchange for some powerful abilities, Wang Chong said to himself. The Stone of Destiny would not elevate an ordinary warrior to a peerless expert overnight. Its effects were in subtler, incremental boosts, and the Stone of Destiny's rewards did not consist of only pure strength, but also included martial arts and techniques. With 4,000 points of destiny energy, the range of upgrades available to Wang Chong had massively increased. In addition, as he accumulated more and more, he would reach conditions that would unlock even more rewards. Buzz! With a thought from Wang Chong, the scene before his eyes changed once more. 5 golden balls of light had appeared above the Stone of Destiny, displaying within them the words mind, body, energy, techniques, and power, the 5 different reward categories offered by the Stone of Destiny. Mind represented belief, body represented body tempering arts, energy represented origin energy, techniques referred to martial techniques and martial methods, and power represented vigor and fortune. Some of these categories had at first been sealed, but after the War of the Southwest, the last 2 categories of techniques and power had been opened, making all the categories available. Wang Chong's eyes naturally turned to the energy rewards. This category was not as straightforward as it seemed. The Stone of Destiny would not directly provide stellar energy, and it certainly wouldn't directly advance a warrior to another level. Instead, these rewards were all things related to origin energy, like halos or stellar energy traits. In moments, the energy rewards available for exchange were displayed in front of Wang Chong. The rewards from the Stone of Destiny had changed since he last saw them. Origin Energy Pill, only effective to warriors at the Origin Energy Realm. Stellar Energy Honer, alters the nature of stellar energy and boosts stellar energy's sharpness. Stellar Energy Piercer, alters the nature of stellar energy and boosts stellar energy's ability to pierce. Wang Chong mentally read through these extremely familiar contents. The Origin Energy Pill and Stellar Energy Honer were not useful to the current Wang Chong. Only the Stellar Energy Piercer was of any use, as it had a chance of ignoring defenses, with additional purchases allowing him to increase the chance of triggering this special effect. But what truly attracted Wang Chong were the new rewards being offered. Stellar Energy Igniter, specific to strength of Lu Wu, upgrades users' Lu Wu energy by 1 level. During battle, rapidly burns away opponent's energy. Amount of energy burned is dependent on user's strength and the level of the opponent. Basic upgrade. Every 15 minutes, a quarter of opponent's stellar energy is burned away. Effect limited to opponents of Imperial Martial Realm and below. Cost: 800 points. Advanced upgrade. Every 15 minutes, a quarter of opponent's stellar energy is burned away. Effect limited to opponents of Saint Martial Realm and below. Cost: 1,200 points. Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes at this reward. He clearly remembered that this ability had not been there the last time he looked. The Stone of Destiny doesn't undergo changes without reason. It seems like besides new categories, new rewards will also be unlocked as I accumulate more destiny energy, Wang Chong speculated. But what truly caught his eye were the words, specific to strength of Lu Wu. It seemed like the Stone of Destiny would also offer special rewards according to the user's circumstances. I already have 2 supreme techniques. One is the Great Yin-Yang Heaven Creation Art, and the other is the Art of God and Demon Obliteration, but neither triggered any change in the Stone of Destiny. Only the strength of Lu Wu caused a change in the reward contents. I wonder where it came from. Wang Chong's mind buzzed as he thought back to the black-clothed people he had encountered. The strength of Lu Wu had belonged to that mysterious group. Wang Chong hadn't expected this strength to trigger a change in the Stone of Destiny, but he had to admit that the stellar energy igniter of the strength of Lu Wu was very useful to him at the moment. The absorption effect of the great yin-yang heaven creation art and the burning away of a quarter of an opponent's stellar energy every 15 minutes might not be enough to kill Dian Mangban, but it was enough to give him a very big problem. Took only a few moments for Wang Chong to reach a decision. Buzz. With a thought, the reward symbolizing stellar energy igniter suddenly began to explode with light. At the same time, a massive stream of energy that was both blazing hot and as cold as ice surged into Wang Chong's body. This was an excruciating feeling, but it swiftly vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, a brand new energy had appeared within Wang Chong's body, one that was simultaneously hot and cold and was beginning to fuse with every cell in his body. What a strange power, Wang Chong thought to himself. This strength was similar to Lu Wu's energy, similarly bursting with vitality, yet it also seemed even more powerful. Interestingly, while nothing appeared to change on the surface, Wang Chong could clearly sense that his strength had been significantly boosted. I wonder what the effect will be. I'll try it out when I fight Dian Mangban in a little while. This had always been the style of the Stone of Destiny, always providing qualitative changes instead of large one-time boosts. Just the stellar energy igniter alone would clearly not be enough to deal with Dian Mangban. So Wang Chong quickly resumed his search. The various rewards from the 5 categories once more emerged before Wang Chong's eyes. These rewards offered different abilities and had different costs, but the vast majority were not what Wang Chong needed at the moment. As he looked through the rewards, his brow gradually began to crease. Wang Chong didn't care very much about Dian Mangban's soldiers, as he had plans to deal with them. The only problem he had no solution for was Dian Mangban. Putting aside everything else, if this operation failed, Dian Mangban would immediately go even crazier and begin his assault on Qixi. Dian Mangban's actions were bold and imaginative, and not even Wang Chong could predict them. He could only guarantee that Dian Mangban's attacks against him would be ineffective, but he could not guarantee the same for the Qixi Protectorate army. Moreover, he also had to consider the penalty of 2,000 points of destiny energy. Suddenly, Wang Chong's gaze paused on the very last reward in the techniques category. Karmic Battle Armor. Basic. Can only be used by user. Can massively boost users' defensive capabilities. Can fend off the thrusts of any divine weapon. In addition, armor will fuse with user's stellar energy and greatly boost user's strength. Exchange condition. User must have achieved Controller of Destiny and have obtained basic Destiny Battle Armor. Karmic Battle Armor is an upgrade to Destiny Battle Armor. Cost: 1,400 points. Upgrade. Advanced Karmic Battle Armor. Strengthen the stellar energy boost. When user's stellar energy fuses with armor, user can be boosted an entire level in strength. Note: boost cannot exceed Saint Martial Realm. Note: boost in strength is followed by an extreme drop in strength. Karmic Battle Armor strength boost will last a maximum of 2 hours. In addition, after use, user will experience approximately 5 days of dizziness and fatigue. Karmic Battle Armor does not consume only the user's stellar energy. Finally, for a period of 1 month, Karmic Battle Armor will not be available for normal use. User should be cautious in using this ability. Upgrade cost: 1,000 points. Extra upgrade. If user pays an additional 80 points of Destiny energy, user can store Karmic Battle Armor in the Stone of Destiny space. At the same time, armor gains the Equip effect. When summoned, all pieces of armor will immediately equip themselves to user, allowing user to swiftly equip the armor in any situation. As he read through these lines of information, Wang Chong fell into a contemplative silence. He could not recall seeing this reward before. Could it be? An idea came to him, and he swiftly moved his mind to the last of the 5 categories, power, and went to the very last reward. Heavenly Mandate Battle Armor. Divine Destiny Battle Armor. Locked. Wang Chong saw exactly what he had predicted he would see. But unlike the Karmic Battle Armor, the words Heavenly Mandate Battle Armor were grayed out and locked. As expected, as I accumulate more Destiny energy, the numbers of rewards I get access to increases. But the price also increases by a frightening amount, Wang Chong quietly said to himself. The items that Wang Chong had initially exchanged for had only cost several dozen points, but rewards like the Stellar Energy Igniter had terrifying prices. The Stellar Energy Igniter alone had taken 1,200 points of Destiny energy, while the Karmic Battle Armor and its additional upgrades would cost 2,480 points of Destiny energy. In the past, he would have only been able to sigh in regret at this armor. But even though the cost for these items was extravagant, their abilities were also extravagant. Both the Stellar Energy Igniter and the Karmic Battle Armor could be used against Saint Martial opponents, and the Imperial Great Generals of the various countries of the world were at the peak of the Saint Martial realm. People stronger than them were few and far between. The Karmic Battle Armor had the even more astonishing effect with a correspondingly astonishing price. For 2,400 Destiny energy, it could boost a user from the Imperial Martial realm to the Saint Martial realm. Although it was just a change in realms, this difference was as vast as that between the heavens and the earth to Wang Chong. At the very least, the Great Inyang Heaven creation art in the Imperial Martial realm was completely different from the Great Inyang Heaven creation art in the Saint Martial realm. Time was short, and it took only a few moments of thought for Wang Chong to rid himself of the hesitation. He first spent 80 points of Destiny energy on the Destiny Battle Armor, Destiny Struggler, after which he spent 1,400 points upgrading it to Karmic Battle Armor, and then another 1,000 points for the Advanced Armor, and finally 80 points for the additional upgrade. In total, Wang Chong had spent 3,760 points of Destiny energy. I have 270 points of Destiny energy left, Wang Chong silently enumerated. The stronger the abilities, the more Destiny energy they would require. So Wang Chong did not dare to rashly spend his remaining points. Buzz. After all this, Wang Chong finally opened his eyes. Lord Marquis, has your cultivation finished? A hint of surprise flashed through Li Sai's eyes as he noticed that Wang Chong was loosening up. Wang Chong nodded. How much time has passed? Has anything happened on the other side? Lord Marquis only began to meditate a few moments ago. Not even 20 seconds have passed, Li Sai said. As for the Tibetans, nothing yet. Oh! Wang Chong was dazed as he now understood why Li Sai had appeared surprised. Although he felt like a long time had passed, it had actually been just 20 seconds. In Li Sai's eyes, he had barely sat himself down. But the flow of time in the mental space had always been different from the flow of time in reality. Boom! As they were speaking, a plaintive horn blared from the Tibetan army, echoing across the battlefield. Unlike the previous horns, this horn carried with it a stifling pressure. Buzz! The earth began to tremble, and even the grass in front of Wang Chong and Li Sai started rustling. Wang Chong's expression turned grave and he immediately stood. Pass on my order for all soldiers to get ready. Dian Mangban is about to attack, Wang Chong sternly said. Sensing the gravity in Wang Chong's voice, Li Sai quickly took off. The moment he left, buzz! A powerful aura emerged from the Tibetan army 2,000 zhang away, clear and distinct. Looking over, Wang Chong saw the black tide of the Tibetan army split apart, allowing a snow-white steed with crimson hooves to trot out. A familiar figure was mounted on this warhorse, its eyes locked onto Wang Chong. Even at this distance, Wang Chong could sense that chilling killing intent and the fiendish air around him. Is the attack finally beginning? Wang Chong had immediately recognized Dian Mangban. Although he had defeated Dian Mangban twice, Wang Chong was not the slightest bit relaxed. Dian Mangban was a famous general of Yusang, a brave, fierce general, and Yusang's Azura war god. In those previous two incidents, Wang Chong had used schemes or group attacks to deal with Dian Mangban, but they had never once engaged in a proper cavalry battle. More importantly, Dian Mangban was the sort of person who would learn from each experience, and with no white fog of barley powder, Wang Chong wouldn't be able to use another dust explosion to deal with him. Brat, your death is certain. Although Dian Mangban had said nothing, Wang Chong could clearly see the murderous intent in his eyes. BZZT. Dian Mangban raised his right hand, giving the signal for a different force of cavalry to trot out. Every soldier of this force was riding an extremely muscular horse, larger in every aspect than the surrounding highland steeds. Their bulging muscles contained an explosive strength. And their riders were also different from the rest of the Tibetan cavalry. Owing to the environment of the plateau, the majority of Tibetans were shorter than the average Han, but each of these riders was extremely tall, and their eyes were dark and cruel. Just by standing in their ranks, they exuded a murderous and baleful aura that soared into the skies and exerted an intense pressure. No ordinary cavalry could exude this kind of intense aura. The only force that could compare to them across the entire plateau was Wang Chong's 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. The White Braves. In the distance, several officers from the Qixi Protectorate Army narrowed their eyes as they whispered out that name. Heba Yi was particularly affected, his pupils shrinking into pinpricks. No one had a deeper impression of the White Braves than the Qixi Protectorate Army. It had needed the deaths of 5,000 soldiers and General Pulin, to learn the power and ferocity of the White Braves under Dian Mangban's command. To the Qixi Protectorate Army, that event was a nightmare. Although there had been only around 2,000 White Braves, each of them had been like a demon out of the underworld. Although the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army had charged into the fray, they were thrown to the sky like ragdolls before the White Braves. Although they had gone up in groups, they had completely failed to stop the advance of the White Braves. This impressive strength, the frightening techniques, and callous heart. Even the veteran Qixi soldiers trembled in fear at the might of the White Braves. That was a bloody night that none of them wanted to remember, including Heba Yi and the other Qixi Protectorate Army officers. Buzz. Time seemed to stop for a moment. All eyes were on Dian Mangban's arm swinging down. Rumble. The earth shuddered as the 5,000 stalwart and proud White Braves surged past Dian Mangban like a mighty flood. They slowly began to pick up speed, and then suddenly accelerated, hoofs thundering against the earth. In a few seconds, the White Braves had reached full speed. The earth shook and dust churned. There were only 5,000 of them, but when these White Braves began to charge, they seemed able to cover the earth and topple mountains. It didn't seem like they were 5,000, but 50,000 or even more. Nay! As the White Braves charged, a cry could be heard behind them. In a white blur, Dian Mangban charged out from behind the army, last to leave but first to arrive. Clang! A metal clattering filled the air, and as the front hooves of the divine steed hit the ground, a dark red halo began to rapidly expand like a whirlwind from Dian Mangban's feet. The world seemed to be stripped of sound as a mighty halo shrouded the battlefield. In a blink, a massive war halo had expanded to the feet of every White Brave. Their energy instantly swelled to inconceivable levels. Not only that, this dark red halo fused together all their energies, rendering them into a single immovable fortress. Buzz. In the distance, even the hitherto silent Fuming Lingcha couldn't help but express his surprise. This Dian Mangban truly does have some ability. Fuming Lingcha's cherished General Pulin, he had been killed by Dian Mangban, as had 5,000 of his soldiers. Although Fuming Lingcha was using Dian Mangban to deal with Wang Chong, deep within his heart, his desire to kill Dian Mangban was no less than Wang Chong's. But even so, Fuming Lingcha had to admit that Dian Mangban was a truly daunting adversary. This powerful halo was not something ordinary cavalry could endure. Just this alone proved that, in terms of training, Dian Mangban was far above ordinary commanders. Fuming Lingcha was also praised for his ability to train soldiers, and his troops were always extremely well disciplined. It was precisely for this reason that even though the Qixi Protectorate did not have many soldiers, it was able to firmly protect Qixi. Both the Yusang Empire and the Western Turkic Khaganate could do nothing against the Qixi Protectorate overseen by Fuming Lingcha. But even the soldiers trained by Fuming Lingcha were outshone by Dian Mangban's White Braves. Even Fuming Lingcha had to admit that, if it were him fighting against Dian Mangban's 5,000 White Braves, Fuming Lingcha would definitely have to put in all his effort and maintain strict command over his soldiers. Dusong Mangpoj might be stronger, but he's not as good of a commander as Dian Mangban. For Yusang to have this kind of person is truly a disaster for my Great Tang and Qixi. If there's a chance, once Wang Chong is dead, I have to kill him as quickly as possible to prevent him from becoming an even bigger problem. Fuming Lingcha's eyes glowed with a fierce and murderous light. Ready! As the 5,000 White Braves approached in a seething cloud of dust, Wang Chong waved his hand, a grim look in his eyes. He had never underestimated his opponents, much less a powerful foe like Dian Mangban. Li Sai, get ready to use the 10 charges 10 victories formation, Wang Chong solemnly ordered. Yes, Lord Marquis. Li Sai knew that Wang Chong was serious and quickly went to make the arrangements. In all his time with Wang Chong, Li Sai had never seen him so solemn. In the past, regardless of the opponent he faced, he would always appear composed and confident, but with Dian Mangban, he was completely different. Li Sai could sense that Wang Chong was being particularly cautious with Dian Mangban. Wang Chong could tell that Li Sai was surprised, but he chose not to explain. In his last life, he hadn't interacted much with Dian Mangban, but had heard far too many tales about him. Dian Mangban was a madman, but he was also an extremely fearsome opponent. In the end, he had become an imperial great general of Yusang, and one who was even stronger than Dusong Mangpoj. There were far too many stories about the cities and countries he had destroyed. And besides, someone who could lead 5,000 white braves to stop the advance of the Arabian Mamelukes in the aftermath of the Tang defeat could not be a mediocre individual. Any opponent who dared to look down on him was only bringing destruction upon themselves. All soldiers, hear my order. Change formation. A thunderous voice quickly rose from behind Wang Chong. With Li Sai's order, the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry quickly began to shift. Nay! As horses whinnied and armor clattered, the Wuxiang cavalry quickly completed the formation change. In a flash, the aura of the army transformed, and a frigid and fiendish aura began to surge into the sky. A simple change of formation instantly attracted the attention of all spectators to this battle. Even the grass around the Wuxiang cavalry had begun to exude a grim and bleak aura. "Milord, what's going on over there? Such thick fiendish energy. What is that brat doing? Those cavalry of Wuxiang don't seem normal." The people of the Qixi Protectorate were quick to notice the transformation of the Wuxiang cavalry. On this tense battlefield, a change in the forces on any side would draw everyone's focus. No one understood what Wang Chong was doing. Even though the Wuxiang cavalry hadn't even begun to charge, they seemed even more dangerous and fierce than before. Right now, anyone who looked at Wang Chong's forces, even at great distances, would instinctively feel a deep unease. If they looked carefully, they would even feel that the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry were unleashing some invisible energy that was blurring the air around them. None of them had ever encountered such a situation before. Although they were clueless as to the meaning of all this, everyone could sense that the Wuxiang cavalry had become extremely formidable. It appears to be some sort of formation. Among the Qixi generals, none was more experienced than the commander of the Western Front, Heba Yi. His pupils had constricted into tiny holes as he stared at the Wuxiang cavalry. Heba Yi knew almost all the formations of the Great Tang like the back of his hand, and he alone was capable of utilizing several of them whenever the situation called for it. Heba Yi had spent many years campaigning in the western regions, and few people could compare to him in this aspect. But even Heba Yi could not recognize the formation Wang Chong was using. From the aura, it was definitely a top-class battle formation, so there was no reason he shouldn't have seen it or at least heard of it. "Milord!" Heba Yi subconsciously turned to the Qixi Protector General, Fuming Lingcha. In terms of experience, no one could surpass Fuming Lingcha. He was the Protector General of Qixi, one of the Great Tang's few and most elite great generals, and there was probably very little that he did not know. But to Heba Yi's surprise, what he saw was Fuming Lingcha with his brow tightly creased, staring hard in Wang Chong's direction. It appeared that he was just as mystified. Stunned, Heba Yi was momentarily speechless. "Milord!" Fuming Lingcha and the Qixi Protectorate army were far from the only ones unsettled by the change in Wang Chong's army. At the same moment, in the rear of the Tibetan army, the generals had turned serious and were beginning to look toward Dusong Mangpoj. Dian Mangban and his 5,000 white braves were admittedly formidable, but those Wuxiang cavalry of the Great Tang also gave off an aura of ferocity, and after experiencing the unstoppable charge of those 5,000 Tang, witnessing them cut down Tibetans like they were weeds, no one dared to underestimate them. Those corpses that still carpeted the battlefield had been the price for underestimating the Tang. Dusong Mangpoj remained silent, his expression as placid as an ancient well. But those officers who were familiar with him had clearly noticed that when Wang Chong's forces had changed formation, Dusong Mangpoj had leaned forward and his muscles tensed. But he had very quickly relaxed, regaining his normal composure. "My lord, that Tang isn't easy to deal with. What if we send soldiers to reinforce General Dian?" a Tibetan general nervously said to Dusong Mangpoj. When they had heard that Huashu Huaitsong and Daluan Ruozhen had lost in the southwest to that great Tang youth, most of them hadn't believed it, but after witnessing that inconceivable explosion, all of them regarded that seemingly ordinary youth like a god. "There's no need." Dusong Mangpoj's eyes flashed for a moment. "Dian Mangban's 5,000 white braves are already more than enough. His 5,000 soldiers are our strongest force. If not even Dian Mangban can do anything about the Tang, sending more soldiers would just be adding to our losses." But when Daluan Ruozhen and General Huashu Huaitsong, a reluctant Tibetan general, wanted to say more, but he was quickly interrupted by Dusong Mangpoj. "Daluan Ruozhen is Daluan Ruozhen and Dian Mangban is Dian Mangban, and the soldiers of the Ngari royal lineage are far inferior to those 5,000 white braves," Dusong Mangpoj indifferently said. But then he remembered something, and his brow slightly creased. "But what you say is reasonable. Zhagong, bring 5,000 soldiers to assist." "Yes, my lord," a Tibetan general replied before quickly turning around. Rumble. A few moments later, another trail of dust rose from the Tibetan army and another horn blared. Another force of 5,000 Tibetan cavalry galloped off, following close behind the 5,000 white braves. "My lord, the Tibetans have sent out more men." Su Kai became nervous as he saw the second cloud of dust, and he subconsciously turned to Wang Chong. "Don't worry about it." Wang Chong's face was cold and emotionless. His strategic objective this time was Dian Mangban and his 5,000 white braves. As long as he achieved this goal, he really didn't care about the 5,000 additional Tibetan cavalry. "Get ready. Attack on my signal." Wang Chong raised an arm, his eyes locked onto the distant Dian Mangban. The 5,000 white braves were in full gallop, and leading the charge was the steely-eyed Dian Mangban. He alone exuded an aura that swept over the earth, that seemed capable of toppling mountains. As a Saint martial expert, Dian Mangban's strength had reached an incredible level that would make the vast majority of martial artists lower their heads and tremble in fear. But Dian Mangban did not care for anyone else. His expression was resolute, his eyes fixed on the distant Wang Chong as if nothing else existed in this world except killing Wang Chong. He could see nothing else and remained unmoved no matter what happened around him. Not even the 5,000 reinforcements from Dusong Mangpoj were able to induce any ripple of emotion. "Come. With this strike, I will crush your bones into powder." Dian Mangban clenched his teeth, his killing intent surging. Although he seemed insane, Dian Mangban was actually someone who preferred all the plans to be made before moving out, and his plans had been perfect here. He had the yak herd, the barley flour, the full army behind it. A lion would still use its strength when hunting down a rabbit, but it was precisely because he had done so that Wang Chong had taken the chance to create that damaging explosion. To the proud Azura war god of Yusang that was Dian Mangban, 20,000 deaths was an utter disgrace. Thus, in this assault, Dian Mangban had cast aside all plans and caution. No matter what tricks Wang Chong had, he would use absolute power to crush them into dust. This time, there were no barriers. On this flat and open plateau, nothing could block his path. "All soldiers, assume the Great Bond formation." Dian Mangban pressed his body against the back of his horse, his eyes glimmering with a savage light as he thrust his arm into the air. Rumble. Around 1,000 zhang from Wang Chong's forces, the 5,000 white braves suddenly let out a shout and began to change their formation, rays of light exploding out of their bodies. Buzz. In a flash, the 5,000 white braves adeptly spread apart, assuming a whole new formation while still charging at high speeds. This was not the Tibetan echelon formation, but a powerful formation that had never been seen before. "O.M. Ma. And I." Me. Hung. The moment they assumed the formation, the 5,000 white braves were covered in a grim shroud. In the air, an ancient and enigmatic voice suddenly began to speak from out of the depths of spacetime. Each of the 6 syllables it intoned carried an explosive strength that bolstered the white braves. When the 6th and final syllable was spoken, the white braves underwent a fundamental transformation. This already formidable force of cavalry instantly soared to astonishing heights. An energy as vast as the mountains and seas exploded out of the white braves, threatening to drown the entire world. This aura was so powerful that even the distant Fuming Lingcha and his Qixi Protectorate army experienced a formidable pressure. It was like those 5,000 soldiers were not charging at Wang Chong, but at them. What sort of formation is this? Even Fuming Lingcha slightly paled at this sight. He had long ago heard of Dian Mangban's reputation, but since the Yusang Empire was located on the extremely isolated plateau and did not have much interaction with the surrounding countries, outsiders had little specifics on its interior. Added on to that the facts that Dian Mangban was not as famous as great generals like Dusong Mangpoj and that he rarely campaigned in Qixi. Even a great general like Fuming Lingcha had never made him a target to watch. But when he witnessed the transformation of the white braves, Fuming Lingcha knew that he had been wrong. He had truly been underestimating this man. Perhaps Dian Mangban was not as famous as Dusong Mangpoj, but he was a powerful martial artist and formidable commander, and he knew extremely powerful formations. If one had to rank them by threat level, he was definitely above Dusong Mangpoj, not below.